You are not good enough. You're not. You know you're not good enough. I know you're not good enough. The cool kids know you're not good enough. Your boss knows you're not good enough. Your wife, your husband, you're not good enough. You're not even that good at this. Whatever this happens to be. The things that you're doing in life, no. You're just not that good. Let's talk about it. This is Sane Enough. I'm Coach Eric. We're going to talk about when is good enough good enough. We all know that that phrase is positive words with a negative interpretation, a negative emotion, a negative vibe. It just doesn't feel good to be told you're good enough. Because what good enough implies is that you could be better. You probably should be better. Somebody else is better. And you just did enough that I don't want to hurt your feelings. So, how do you handle that and still maintain a healthy mental perception of your performance? How do you improve your mental performance if what you're staring down the barrel of is good enough? And what if you're not even convinced you actually are good enough? Well, as far as I'm concerned, good enough can be good enough. And that is a mental performance reframing of a negative. And we're going to look at it as a positive because you cannot always be at your best. You don't have your 100% A game every minute of every day. And if you do, you have set the bar too low for what is your A game. So let's get into this thing. What's the number one thing that haunts somebody, that drives somebody towards the evil that is good enough is bad? It's perfectionism. Good enough is only bad if you assume that at every given moment you should be able to be better. You should be able to be perfect. You're pursuing that 100% A performance every single time, and that is commendable. But if you can never accept less than that and still be happy, you've reached a place where perfectionism is no longer a virtue. It's now a peril. Hey, look, I just stumbled through that word. Virtue. If I wanted to go back here, I could chop it. I could edit it. I could take that out. That was a mistake. Oops. But you know what? You knew what I meant. You knew what I said. It's good enough. And we're going to keep it rolling because I'm feeling good about where we're at. I've got the right mindset. I've got the right energy. My toothache's gone away. Bit bad on the cap on a molar. You know, right now, got a cup of Joe in me. Had a good day so far. We're going to roll forward. But if I was a perfectionist, I'd be slamming on the brakes right now and going, Coach Eric, you owe the listener perfect every single time. If that's you, you're giving yourself a heavy, heavy dose of anxiety every single time you attempt to do something and you're not flawless. And you're not going to be flawless every time. Let's get that out of the way once more. You will not be perfect every time. Okay? So, where does that put us? Well, perfectionism comes from both internal and external sources, right? We all know the stories of the mom, the dad, the professor, the boss at work, maybe it's grandma, maybe it's your best friend, your significant other, doesn't matter, who has tried to vault you towards perfectionism, who has tried to elevate you towards a better you, right? And they've put out this standard, hey, you can do this every time. I believe in you. But they don't give you a realistic target. They give you that stretch goal as the only goal. And what was originally, and hopefully in their minds, a positive reinforcement of you reaching your goals, it starts to become a nagging. It starts to become pressure, and it starts to become unrealistic. And it can go from being a positive, uplifting, I know you can do it, this is where we want to get to, it can become a negative. It can become almost an abusive feeling for you, where every time you see them, you want to hide your head because you know they're going to be asking, hey, how's it going? And you don't want to tell them because you're not at 100%. Did you get that work done yet? Oh, I was up late last night with it. I'm like 85% done. I know it's due Friday, but well, I think you're good enough to get that done today. Why don't you burn the midnight oil? Let's knock this thing out. Right? And by the way, this needs to be the best report you've ever turned in. Didn't you get the memo? We've all been there. Why don't you have a significant other that you want to marry? Why don't you want to become that part of your life? Why don't you want to have a family? Why don't you have this? Why don't you? Why don't you? Why don't you? What they're really saying is we want you to be happy like we're happy in our life. And we feel like if you put yourself out there that you're a beautiful person and you'll find a significant other and you'll get married and you'll have lots of babies and life will be perfect for you. But what it feels like is, why are you so ugly that you can't get a boyfriend or a girlfriend? That's what it feels like. It hurts, right? Oh my gosh, I can't believe you went 1 for 4 today. And that hit you got was the worst contact you made. That was a little dribbler. You didn't even deserve to be on base for that one. Well, wait a minute. That's batting .250. That's not the end of the world. That dropped pass at the end of the game, hey, that was one play. Had 8 other catches. What do you mean? I'm not good enough anymore. Gotta be perfect, gotta be perfect, gotta be perfect. They're trying to lift you up to make you the best person you can be, the best player you can be, the best employee you can be. And yet that external pressure goes from being uplifting to demoralizing to making you hide from whatever it is you're doing. Maybe you quit playing sports. Maybe you give up on dating. Maybe you take yourself off the apps. Maybe you start ducking into the bathroom every time you see your office coworker or your boss coming down the hall because you don't want to discuss the fact that you aren't perfect, that you didn't reach it. And so now you've gone from being a powerful person, a mentally healthy person, a person with the mental performance capacity to push through whatever adversity you're dealing with, to somebody who's hiding and is scared and is full of anxiety. And that leads to more failure. It leads to depression. It leads to a growing weakness within you. And then it starts to become you, right? Now you feel like you have to be perfect. You start putting that pressure on yourself. The self-imposed, the internal perfectionist pressure is even worse. You know, a lot of people have this come out and it becomes like an OCD where you just have to compulsively be perfect. And you have to be able to remind yourself, you have to be able to step back and take a look at this and say, hey, if I keep going at this rate, I'm going to burn out. If I keep going at this rate, not only am I going to start stacking mistakes, I'm going to start stacking failures. Because I'm going to judge what was a quality result only for its flaws, only for its imperfections. We're not going to look at the 85% good. We're going to look at the 15% bad. And we're going to focus so much on that we're going to beat ourselves down. And the result's going to be next time, we may not even want to finish. Because if we procrastinate long enough, if we don't get it started right away, and then when we do start it, we just kind of ease into it. And then as we're getting into it and we're doing it and we start feeling that it's not perfect, we just kind of let it fade. We just kind of let it wander off. We kind of let the project slide, right? So now, instead of having a project that you've started, you felt good about, and you've worked all the way through, you've beat yourself up so much about what it should have looked like, you never finish. So now the burnout has set in. The fear of failure is hovering on you. The fear of imperfections, the fear of flaws, the fear of being judged by others, and frankly, the fear of judging yourself. It all leads to a place where it's easier to just never finish. That project will forever be a work in progress, so you can never have final judgment on it. And the fear of perfectionism, the pressures of perfectionism, the burnout caused by perfectionism leads you down that path. So, am I telling you to be mediocre? it isn't that I'm telling you not to be mediocre. I don't want you to strive for mediocre. I don't want you to set your goals at mediocre. Because like I said earlier, if you're always achieving 100%, if you're always hitting that mark with ease, you've set the bar too low. You've accepted mediocrity and you've taken that as your identity. We're not here for that. That's not what I'm talking about. I want you to strive for better. I want you to strive for your best. I want you to set that perfect score goal down the pipe, right? But I want you to understand there are stages of success that are less than perfect, that are still success. And for every project, for every job, for every sport, for every hobby, for every relationship, those levels are going to be different. And your levels are going to be different than mine. But you have to embrace those facts and take the pressure off yourself to always be 100% right. There's going to be days when you wake up and you just want to go back to bed. There's going to be days where you get up and you go back to bed. That doesn't make it a failure. If every day you get up and go back to bed and you get nothing done, now you've slipped into a place where you need to get help and you need to work through that. But before you get there, if you start to understand that it's okay to occasionally have a rough spot, you can get past that, start utilizing your mental performance tools, and push towards the higher goals on the days where you feel better. And you can use the days where you don't feel as good to work on improving those days into better days. We use a thing called red light, green light. It's a great tool. We'll go over it in more depth either later on. But it's where your green is your 100%, it's your perfect, you're wonderful, right? And your red light, that's your stop. That's your failure points. That's the misery, the worst that you've got, right? And in the middle, there's caution, there's yellow. And so if you've got a green, you're just cruising, we're good. If you've got a red, it's time to pump the brakes and do everything you can to get that red to a yellow. Use your tools to elevate yourself. If you're sitting on yellow, that's the mediocrity we were talking about. Don't be satisfied with that. Look for ways to make that green. But understand that there are times when that yellow is good enough, especially if you started off with a red. There are times when good enough is, in fact, good enough. Now, again, we're not embracing mediocrity. We're not saying that that's the goal, but we're understanding the benefits of accepting it as the result. One of the hardest things for a perfectionist to do is take a chance, to take a risk, to be truly, truly independent and creative in the process of what they're doing. Because those types of activities involve a risk of failure. And the higher you aim, the greater you want to be, the easier the fall is and the longer the fall is. And the more you put yourself out there and you tell people, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm aiming for, this is my goal. I'm not just going for what I can do today, but I've got a stretch goal for 5 years from now. I'm going to hit that. I'm going to do great. But if you fail at that, and you're going to fail at some of them, we all do, that fall hurts. That negative hurts. And if you only get partway there, it might have been tremendously successful for anybody who's looking on the outside going, man, that dude nailed it. But internally you're going, I didn't get there. I know what my goal really was, and I didn't get there. So now the next time you set a goal, are you really going to set it for all the way out there? Where you're taking all this chance, where you're putting yourself out there? Or are you going to dial it back to something more reasonable? And if you dial it back for something more reasonable and you nail it, are you going to then be willing to put yourself out there to try to go get it at that higher mark, at that more creative, that more forceful, that more risky level? You probably aren't, because you've completed the project. In your mind, it's done. And so you've left all of this opportunity out there. Perfectionism comes with a huge opportunity cost. Because if you settle for what comes out of the box, what comes off the shelf, if you settle always, always, always for the easy, the pre-made, the done-for-you package, if you always settle for that, you never get the best. You never truly, truly get the best if you're not willing to risk that you won't get success. It all comes that way. So when you're seeking nothing but 100% perfection, you're either setting yourself up for too much pressure, too much burnout, too much failure, or you're scaring yourself into a place where in the future, what you're going to do is just accept mediocrity so that you win. You never lose because you never aim high enough to lose. That becomes your idea of perfect. And that isn't actually perfect, but you've convinced yourself that it is. And so that is really, really dangerous. And that is where we look at perfectionism as a negative, because we want you to want to be better. And we don't want you to be lazy. And when we tell you it's okay to be good enough, the very first thing most people think is, okay, so I can just be lazy? No. You have to accept partial success as success in moments when partial success is success. And you still have to be willing to risk failure to seek better, but not on every project, not on every effort, not on every relationship, not on every job, not in every moment of your life. You need to pick your spots to go for it. And if you pick those spots right and you use the tools you have, you can take perfectionism from being a negative and make it a motivating factor in getting to good, to getting to great, and to getting to perfect. But if you hammer yourself on things that don't matter, if you truly look at a project and you realize, you know what, this just isn't that big a deal, then it's time to go ahead and accept the fact that what you accomplished is good enough. You are good enough. This yellow light day is going to pass, and we're going to seek green as we move forward down the road. It's all about realistic expectations. It's about prioritizing effectively. If you can't be 100% every time, then you need to pick the times when you really, really need to be 100%. And a lot of times, those times involve diminishing returns, right? You can look at a project and say, okay, if I can get to 100%, it's going to take me 10 hours, but I can get there. I can get to 100% in 10 hours. But there's 3 more hours of daylight today. And in 3 more hours, I can get it to 95% perfect. I can get it to 90% perfect. I can get it to a threshold that is good enough and not have to come back tomorrow and spend another 7 hours, which may turn into 8 hours, which may turn into 10 hours as we continue to pile on the needs and the anxieties of being perfect and meeting that goal. Sometimes it's the end and reaching that very perfect level that takes the most time, causes the most stress. And it not only is the hours spent diminishing in value, but in the end, you're going to look at your end result and you're going to feel less great about it because it became a burden. And you don't want it to become a burden. You don't want your activities in life to become burdens. So what you have to do is you have to be realistic. You have to recognize when extra effort is going to only give you a minimal improvement over where you're at now, except this is done, it's good enough, and I can move on to another project and really put the energy I have to use, because your time is finite. Your energy is finite. Your resources are finite. You can't give everything you've got to every minute that you're doing things. So what you're trying to do then is set a threshold, right? You're going to set that minimum threshold. I've got to get to this point to be happy. You're going to set a good goal. Good. This would be a good result, not a, all right, fine result, but a good, I'm happy, I'm proud result, right? And then you're going to stick out there. This is perfection. This is the absolute best I can do. And you put those 3 goals out there. And if you want to put 4, another one in the middle out there, that's fine too. But you put those out there for yourself, write them down, right? Write them down and say, how long is it really going to take me to get there? And I know you're thinking, well, wait a minute. You want me to spend time writing this stuff down instead of seeking perfection? Yes, I do. I do, because it's going to save you time in the long run. You spend 5 minutes in the planning stage and it can save you hours on the job. So look at it realistically and decide, what am I going to aim for? What can I realistically get to? And what is my drop dead, I'm out? What's your hard out? Always have that in mind. I'm going to seek perfection. My good enough threshold's at 4 hours. My absolute perfection, I target that at 10 hours. If I get to 4 hours and I feel like I'm almost there, I'll give it at most 2 more hours. I'm a hard out at 6 hours. That way, it does not ruin the rest of what you're doing, and you've given yourself reward points. You've patted yourself on the back. You've said, hey, look, I got there. I did good. I tried to do a little better. I polished it up. The end result is great. It doesn't matter if you're writing a song. It doesn't matter if you're buffing your car. It doesn't matter if you're building a dog house. Look at that. Imperfect. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what you're doing. As long as you acknowledge what you're doing, you acknowledge the levels that are acceptable and unacceptable, and you find the right return on investment. So, we talked about it. It's about setting realistic expectations. It's about prioritizing effectively. It's about knowing diminishing returns. It's about maximizing your satisfaction versus your sacrifice. So what do you do with that, though? Is it really just a matter of writing down 4 things and knowing that that's enough? It can be. That realistically, for a lot of people, that can be enough. If you do adequate planning, 5 minutes or whatever it takes, that might be the tool that gets you there and helps you battle your urge to just constantly scrub the floor. Every time you see one speck of dust, you scrub the entire floor again. Good enough would have been to wipe up that speck of dust. Perfect might be to scrub the whole house. But what are you sacrificing to accomplish that? So you need to identify your perfectionism triggers. You need to sit down and be honest with yourself. And again, writing it down makes it real. And when I say write it down, you can type it, you can voice text it, you can get out the old pen and paper. That's not important. That's a method for you. You can voice record it. I love to voice record things. But the key is to recognize your triggers. What tends to make you seek a level of perfection beyond what is reasonable for the task at hand? Is it who the task is for? You love your significant other, and you find yourself willing to really, really burn out trying to make what you're doing for them perfect. You're buying a birthday present, right? And you guys have been together a long time. You're at a stage in your life where you have most of the things you need. There's not a lot of big wants. So then you spend hours upon hours researching all these little things to get the perfect gift because you love them so much and you want to show that. But you waste so much of your time. And the truth of the matter is that gift, as long as it came from the heart and wasn't something stupid or something really for yourself, was going to be virtually the same meaning to your significant other because they hopefully feel the same way about you that you do about them. And so your return on investment of that time and that effort and that energy, it's not there. And if you've spent an extra $200 on the gift instead of getting something that was more in line with everything else you own, maybe you get that wow effect, but are you also going to have haunting doubts as to whether or not they're disappointed you spent that money? You need to know, is that a trigger for you? Is that something that's not only going to haunt you because you're seeking perfectionism, but it's also going to tag in those other voices to nag at you and bother you about a mistake you just made, right? So you need to identify what it is. Maybe it's a sport, maybe it's a hobby, maybe it's a boss, maybe it's a type of project. If it's a writing project, you just have to get it right down to the letter. You need to identify those triggers. And if it's financial gain, if it is prestige, if it is ego, once you identify that and you put the big old circle around it, you can start attacking that specific trigger. And that allows you to more easily set the realistic goal because you've now identified the risk of triggering yourself. And as you set that goal, you can set up the resources you need to counteract that risk. You can be smart about that. It doesn't have to just be, well, this is my trigger. It can also be, this is my trigger and this is my cure for that trigger. In fact, I hope you find one. And if you do, tell me about it. So you set the realistic goals. You wrote down your triggers. You then take those triggers and you counter them with resources. And you take those goals and you break them down into bite-sized consumable projects. And then you step back and you say, all right, what's important here? What's the most important thing? Where's the line I got to get to? How much time can I realistically allocate to this? What amount of time is it going to take for me to get better? Is it worth it? You go through all of that. You step back, you look at it, and you say, you know what? I got this. And that is important. You have to tell yourself you've got it. You've got to believe in yourself that you've got it. And then when you've got it, when you've finished it, and it's good enough, you've got to accept that. And you still got to reward yourself. You still got to say, attaboy, you got her done. You still got to care about the final result, even if it wasn't perfect. And you have to have compassion for yourself and understanding for yourself when you come up short. So make it a process-based, not a result-based sense of accomplishment, right? Focus on progress, not the perfect ending. Shift from thinking about things only in terms of the ROI and just making that return on investment a part of the process, because you're good with the fact that you can get through the process, and that in and of itself, reaching an endpoint is an accomplishment. And if you set your goals out and you look at that accomplishment, and you see where you ended up, and you see that you got to a level 3 of 4, and your good enough mark had been a level 2, then that's not even just a, hey, I'm good enough. That's a, you did great. Not perfect, but I did great. And if it's a level 1, if it's a red light, if it's bad, but you're done, forgive yourself. Forgive yourself. There's going to be screw ups. You're going to have bad days. You're going to have things that you look back on and you go, yeah, I didn't knock that one out of the park. But if you don't forgive yourself, it's going to be really hard to put yourself out there on the next one. So I'm sitting here, I've got my outline written for this episode, and I've got an example written out that I want to use to share with you this concept of good enough. And I'm going to make a switch here. We're going to make a change on the fly. This may turn out to be a disaster. I'm hoping it turns out good enough. What I'm going to talk to you about is something in my own life, and that's this podcast, right? Not every episode is going to be my best work. In fact, this is episode 4, and I can tell you, I've given you 4 different styles of podcast within this mental performance landscape. And I can tell you that for some people, episode 1 is going to be more useful and more desirable. But for me, when I go back and listen to it, it's very dry, right? I went through an overview of visualization, and I gave you these little tidbits of these different tools. And yes, if you have some experience here, you can take those tidbits and you can use it to do better with your visualizations. But I didn't deep dive into any of it and really get to the nuts and bolts of it because it was an overview episode. I was setting it up to have season 1 be a dive into visualization. We're going to do half a dozen episodes in which I really got into the different methodologies. And then episode 2 came around, and after getting some feedback, I realized I'd had a missed opportunity in what could have been episode 1. So I went ahead and tackled that. And then I sat down to do another visualization episode. In episode 3, I jumped all over an item that had been hot in my mind. And that was consumerism, because I've been experiencing it in my children's lives. I've been experiencing it in my life. And then I was at Costco and heard people talking about it in terms of their own life and how they wouldn't do that, buying their son a Samsung phone instead of an iPhone, or worse yet, accepting that their son would get the free phone from AT&T, because that level of phone would be a disgrace for my child. I would never do that to them. And that just really, for me, hit home that this is something I need to talk about. I need to get out there. So I had a rant episode, right? So I gave you this overview episode that was kind of dry, more traditional for what would be a mental performance episode. And then I kind of sidetracked a little bit, gave you some skill work, but more of a overview of my theories of mental performance in episode 2. And then episode 3, I gave it to you straight from the heart, right? And none of those were perfect. And so when I sat down to do this episode, I realized I didn't need to get right back into visualization. We'll get there. We'll get back there. But what I needed to explain to you guys was that not everything's perfect. I'm not perfect. Nothing I'm doing here is perfect. Nothing you're doing where you are is perfect, except for maybe that one time, right? That one time it was perfect. And you can tell that story that I always call that the 4 touchdown day, right? Maybe you had that, but you can't make that be the only thing in your life that's important. It can't be your only identity, and it can't be the only result that's good enough. You know, if you're a basketball player and you go out and hit 10 threes in a game, hallelujah. But that can't be your standard going forward. Steph Curry's not hitting 10 threes every game. What makes you think you are? You have to set your standards and have them be reasonable, or you'll beat yourself up. So I decided, all right, I'm going to do this outline. I hammered it out, and I was feeling really good about it. And I had this great example about sports, and I had another example about grades. But let's talk about my podcast instead. All right. So I go back, I listen to that first episode, and it's kind of boring. It is. I know it is. But it's useful. It's a valuable episode. If you go back and you listen to that and you get a second listen to, what you're going to find is that there's lots of information there that is going to help you. So I could wipe it out because it wasn't perfect. Or I can leave it there as a testament to what can help, what can be good enough, and what will really, really be good enough for some people, and just move on to the next one and give you a little better flavor in the next one. And that's what I've decided to do. Within these episodes, I haven't done a ton of editing. I may stop every now and then if I know I'm going to sneeze or take a drink of coffee. But by and large, if I stumble through a word or two, I'm going to leave it in there for you. Not because I'm lazy. It doesn't take very long to fix it. But realistically, I used to be on radio. When it was live over the air, nobody complained if I bumbled a word here or there, or a name here or there. Occasionally someone would call in and correct the name for me. And since I had a radio show in the South and I've got my Midwest accent, they made sure to let me know that those Yankees just don't know how to say our names. But it's all part of understanding who I am, understanding how I work. And it's realistic that I'm going to make occasional mistakes in what I'm doing. And it's realistic that so are you. When I paint a room, I want every square inch of that room to look the same from every angle. And for the most part, it's going to when you stand back and look at it, right? But if you're judging that paint job with a magnifying glass and a spotlight, you're going to find where the pores in the drywall didn't quite get filled in as well in certain places versus other places. And when I set the shop light up and it puts off a lot of heat, it dries faster in certain places and then it doesn't blend quite as well. It may look great from the doorway. It may look great from the middle of the room. But if I get close enough and I evaluate close enough, eventually I'll find the flaw. And if I beat myself up for that, and then I fix that, what have I gained? You're never going to see that flaw. I know it's there because I went too far in checking it out. And the same is true with project after project after project. The same is true in all of your sporting events. If you go 1 for 4 versus 2 for 4, that's the difference between being disappointed in your at-bats that day and being a stud. That's crazy. It's one game. It's 4 at-bats. Statistically, it's not even relevant to a season. You can't beat yourself up over that. Even if you're 0 for 4 that day, you took your swings, right? You have to accept that process. And so the standard is going to be different in baseball at 0 for 4 than it's going to be painting a room and I only paint half the wall. Now we're into unacceptable failure, right? You got to at least finish the wall. But you don't have to get on base to still be successful in baseball. So there's got to be a different standard there. And in my radio show, I don't have to get every syllable right. I don't. But I can't curse. I can't start talking about balloon animals unless we do an episode on balloon animals. And I need to at least give you a tool that you can take home with you and use to make your mental performance better. Or I haven't accomplished the goals I've set out. That doesn't mean it's got to be perfect today. It doesn't mean that the next one's going to be perfect. But the goal is to be good enough. And I know that ties right into the name, right? Sane enough. Because we're all a little crazy. The question is, your level of sanity, do you need to seek medical help? Or can we improve you right here with a little coaching? So if you're sane enough, let's get going. So look back through this. Listen it again if you want to. But understand that the big thing is differentiating between good enough happening because you were lazy and good enough happening because that was the result. And if it was the result of a good, solid effort and any further investment is going to be diminishing, then you need to accept that result, pat yourself on the back, and move on to the next one. If you were lazy and you were functioning in the red, you may still need to accept the result, but then you need to use that as a moment to learn about yourself and grow. You need to capitalize on that. You need to take that negative and try to make it a positive, try to move it from red to yellow, right? And I've talked a lot about that, about the red, green, yellow, and we'll get into that more. But I'm going to give you a quick recap on it so that you can leave here today with the tool at your disposal. And you can do some research on it if you want. You can hit me up if you want. You can wait for an episode where we dive even deeper into it if you want. But again, the key thing here is to set standards. And when you set a standard, then you can identify that green, go, perfect, great, love it, right? Red. The things that I did that landed me in red, I need to identify. Was it because I was lazy? Was it because I was ill-prepared? Was it because I didn't have the right tools? I didn't have the right resources? I didn't have the skill set needed to do it in the first place? I didn't take the pre-activity steps that I normally would take. I either didn't plan it out. I didn't stretch. I wasn't focused mentally on what I needed to do. I can identify the habits that got me into a red result. And then in the yellow, those times in between, those times that are mediocre, you identify those. You say, okay, so if I was in the red, what do I need to do? What can I identify as the result and how it got there? And if it's because of laziness, can I look at that and say, okay, well, if I had taken a 20-minute cat nap and really got my energy back, I could have pushed myself into yellow. So next time I'm going to do that. Or if I had listened to some energizing music, something uplifting, something that got me my mojo going, I could have pushed myself from a red result to a yellow result. If my hard out was 6 hours and I quit at 4 hours because at 4 hours was supposed to be good enough, but it actually wasn't, it was still a red result, but I bailed anyway because that's what I was told I could do. Well, you need to evaluate your time management. You need to evaluate your goal setting standards. And then you need to say to yourself, hey, I should have spent the extra 2 hours it took to go from red to yellow. Maybe not the extra 6 hours it would have taken to go all the way to green. But you have to identify those things. And it starts with setting standards. It starts with setting goals. So give yourself realistic expectations. Give yourself a realistic goal. Give yourself a realistic time frame. And then evaluate through the process not just at the end, but through the process where you are. Are you in red? Are you in green? Are you in yellow? Use the tools you have to push yourself in the direction you want to. And when the project's done, when the grade is in, when the results are on the table, when the scoreboard is flashing 0, step back, evaluate where you were, be honest with yourself, and then accept the result. Because if you can't accept the result, it's going to haunt you. You're going to be laying in bed at night looking at the ceiling, wondering, if I had just spent 20 more minutes shopping, would I have found the right gift? If I had just taken 10 more practice shots, would I hit that free throw? If I would have just turned the heat lamp off, would I have got better edges? And if you do that, you'll get in that spiral of arguing with your inner voices. And then you're going to start losing ground. You don't want to lose ground. You want to at least tread water and then strive for swimming forward. So that's where we're at today. This was all about understanding that you are, in fact, good enough. You are. If you weren't good enough, you wouldn't be listening to a show where you're trying to get better. If you weren't good enough, you wouldn't be taking the time to figure out how to make yourself better. You're good enough. I told you weren't, but I was lying. Lots of people will lie to you. It's to make them feel good a lot of times, but sometimes it's to motivate you. Maybe I was just telling you you're not good enough so that you'd say, yes, I am, Coach Eric. I am good enough. Or maybe it's just a good hook at the beginning of the show. I appreciate you guys listening today. I hope this show was good enough. I hope you take this tool home with you and you understand the difference between good enough because you're lazy and good enough because you did what you could and the results you got. And I hope you take the time to start planning what you're doing just a little bit more and learn to write it down. Learn to not be embarrassed by setting real goals. And we'll dive into goal setting. We'll dive into kebab. We'll dive into workflow. We'll do all these things as we continue forward. But for today, I just want you to take a step back and accept results and enjoy the fact that you got a result. So the question is, are you good enough? And if the answer you give yourself is no, ask again and keep asking until you can find a way to understand that, in fact, the answer should have been yes. So at the end of today's show, we're going to have another song. I'm not going to give you one that was built for a client. I'm actually going to give you one that was built for me because it can't always be about everybody else. In today's episode, we went ahead and dove a little bit into Coach Eric's brain. So here comes a motivational song that's all about those inner voices. It's all about arguing with yourself. It's all about the late nights thinking about the things you've done wrong. And it's just a way of framing that in a song that helps me kind of capture that process and that moment and those thoughts and control that spiral just a little bit better. So enjoy the song. It's out there already on Spotify, on iHeartRadio, on YouTube Music, on Apple. So you can find it out there if you want to. It's called Keep You Warm. Hope you enjoy it. Send me some feedback. Let me know what you think. Thumbs up, comments, subscribe. You know the drill. All those great things.
In a room full of silence, they shout loud. Echoes of whispers form a crowd. Tell me what's real, what's all in my head. Dancing with shadows on the edge of my bed. Voices they barter for control and peace. Promises of calm but never release. Stand in my They say you're alone, but we'll keep you warm. Guide you through life away from home. But these are the voices that love to deceive. Adding to the stories that we even believe. Draw lines in the sand, asking them to wait. Try to find closure, hoping it's not too late. Hold on to reason, let go of the dread. Constantly haggling with the voice in my head. Negotiating with the echoes deep inside. Searching for solace on this crazy ride. Crazy ride. Voices in the dark, they know my name. Playing twisted games, they all sound the same. They say you're alone, but we'll keep you warm. Guide you through life away from harm. But these are the voices that love to deceive. Adding to the stories I weave. They say you're alone, we'll keep you warm. They say we'll keep you warm. They say we'll keep you warm. They'll keep you. We'll keep you.
This has been Sane Enough. I'm Coach Eric. Thank you for staying in with us. I hope you enjoyed Keep You Warm. Hope you enjoyed the podcast. I hope that we've made life just a little bit easier for you to plan forward and maximize your mental performance. We'll have more episodes coming down the road as we get going into some more tools. And for those of you seeking really more tools for that toolbox, I promise you we'll have more episodes that are a little on the drier side and give you a deeper dive into individual tools. But in the meantime, I'm Coach Eric. This has been Sane Enough.
Voices in my mind, they call my name. Whispering doubts, losing the game. Talking to myself, is reality in sight? Inner battles keep me up at night. Sane enough for a new day. Sane enough to find my way. Working on myself, building my name. Questioning doubts, changing the game. Voices are my strength, reality in sight. Talking through it, I can sleep at night. Sane enough for a new day. Sane enough to find my way. Oh! Sane enough for a new day. Sane enough to find my way.